In August of 2010, two young women set out on a 3-day hike in northern Alaska and were never seen alive again. Caitlin and Denise Morrow had come to the small town of Talkeetna for their last adventure before their older sister had to return to work at the hospital. They bought provisions, made a route, announced their return time, and headed toward the wild lakes outside Denali National Park. 4 years later, the hunters came across a burned-out hut among the mountain pines. Inside, under the charred beams, there were two skeletons with plastic bags on their heads. August 2010. The town of Talkeetna, nestled among river floodplains and dense forests, lived to its slow northern rhythm. Here, summer days were long, but autumn was already felt. Cold mornings, low skies, the smell of smoke from wood-burning stoves. Tourists sat in the coffee shops on the main street. Seaplane pilots discussed the weather, and a few miles outside the city, the wild Alaskan territory began. Off-road, taiga, swamps, and silence that even the wind does not interrupt. The Morrow sisters, Caitlin and Denise, came here from Michigan in late summer. The eldest, Caitlin, was a nurse and was supposed to start working in a Detroit hospital in the fall. She saw this trip as a farewell to her free life, a short respite before the next round of duties. Denise, a junior, was studying photography. She took pictures of everything on the way: old hangars, a dog running along the road, and even the faces of passers-by in the shops. They both looked alike: blonde hair, the same smiles, but different personalities. Caitlin kept everything under control, checking maps, first aid kit, food supplies. Denise joked that her sister was a walking survival guide. They were planning a 3-day hike to a cabin near one of the little-known lakes deep in the forest. Denise had learned about it from a forum for hunters. Someone had once written that you could spend the night there if you were brave enough to find the way. Caitlin was hesitant at first, but agreed. The routes were marked on the map, the weather was clear, and they had all the necessary equipment. On August 25th, they were seen in a grocery store on the main street. The owner, Johnny Peterson, later told the police that the girls were buying canned food, gas for a stove, warm socks, and batteries. Denise took pictures of the window, laughed, and said that places like this are the most real. Caitlin checked the list in her notebook several times. Her manner was composed, even tense. The salesman remembered that they paid in cash and politely thanked her before leaving. Around 7 p.m., they were seen again at a gas station near the city's exit. A surveillance camera captured their old dark green Jeep Cherokee. Caitlin was standing by the pump. Denise was drinking coffee from a plastic cup and laughing. According to the gas station attendant, the older sister then called her mother. This call was the last contact. Martha Morrow later recalled, "She said that everything was fine, that the place looked calm, and that they would be back in 3 days. Her voice was familiar, calm." After 8 p.m., the Jeep headed north toward a dirt road that stretched through a forested valley to the lakes. The locals simply called this road the Old Hunting Track. The asphalt quickly gave way to bumpy dirt, and the tracks were overgrown with grass. Pine trees stretched out around the road, thickly lining the road, merging into a dark wall. Witnesses interviewed later recalled that the weather changed dramatically that evening. The sky became overcast, and a cold wind rose. One of the drivers, who was returning on the same road, saw an SUV with 2 women in it at dusk. The car was standing on the side of the road, its headlights on. He slowed down but did not stop. He said the girls looked busy, like they were looking at a map. It was about 20 miles from Talkeetna, near an old bridge over a stream. That same evening, residents of one of the villages reported seeing headlights on that road after midnight, although traffic there usually stops before dark. These testimonies were never confirmed, but they became the last hints of a path that led deeper into the taiga. Caitlin left a note in her diary, which was later found among her belongings in the car. "Leaving tomorrow morning. Denise insists on seeing the sunrise by the lake. She says there is a special light there. Her neat handwriting breaks off in the middle of the page. On the morning of August 26, they probably left the parking lot and moved on. Their route was to pass through 2 crossings and a narrow forest path marked only on old maps. According to local fishermen, this area is difficult even for experienced travelers. It's easy to lose your bearings there. There are the same hills, swamps, and ear-piercing silence all around. None of them had a satellite phone, only ordinary cell phones, which no longer picked up a signal a few miles from the city. But even without communication, they seemed confident. In the photo Denise took that morning, they are both smiling. Behind them is their car and an endless wall of forest. After that, the photos stop. No one in Talkeetna saw their faces again. A few days later, the road disappeared under the rains, leaving only tire tracks that were washed away by wind and water the following week. And it was there, among these thickets, that a story began that would become one of the darkest secrets of northern Alaska. 3 days have passed since Caitlin and Denise left Talkeetna. On the evening of August 28, Martha Morrow, the sisters' mother, sat by the phone in her home in Grand Rapids, Michigan, waiting for a call that was supposed to come in the morning. In the diary next to the phone, she made an entry: return, August 28th. Caitlin was always true to her word. If she promised to call, she did so to the minute. This time, the phone was silent. At first, Marta was not worried. She knew that in Alaska the connection was unstable, and in remote areas there was no connection at all. She dialed her eldest daughter's number several times, short beeps, and then a familiar message. The subscriber is temporarily unavailable. She tried Denise's. Same thing. After 10 unsuccessful attempts, Marta decided that her daughters simply couldn't get through. But the night passed and there was no call. The next morning, she called every hour. Her notebook gradually filled with hours of calls and short notes. No answer. Silence again. By the evening, her anxiety had turned to fear. According to her neighbor, Marta looked exhausted and said that she felt like something was wrong. She knew that even if Caitlin was delayed, she had to find a way to report, in the city, in the park, at the ranger station. On August 30th, she contacted the Alaska State Police. A recording of the conversation with the officer on duty was preserved in the case file. In it, the woman explained that her daughters were supposed to return 3 days ago and that they had last contacted her from a gas station in Talkeetna. The duty officer replied in the standard way. Adult tourists can be delayed in a hike. They usually get in touch themselves. Marta insisted that the girls were responsible, had a clear schedule, and always reported on their trips. The same day, she called the National Park Service, leaving a request to check campsites and routes in the Denali area. Her message was passed on to the officer on duty at Fairbanks. A brief report was made about the disappearance of 2 Michigan women. The search began slowly. First, the police checked the nearest hospitals and motels. The result was 0. No one had seen the Morrow sisters or recorded their names in the registration books. Later, the officer in charge of the investigation recalled that it was a typical disappearance without signs of a crime. There are dozens of them in Alaska every year. Tourists get lost, change their route, lose contact. In most cases, everything ends happily. On September 2nd, Alaska State Police Sergeant Harry Calder arrived in Talkeetna. He contacted local vendors and gas station employees. The testimonies matched. The girls left town in an old Jeep Cherokee in the evening and headed north on the road. They were never seen again. Calder checked the guest logs at the ranger stations, and there were no records of the sisters' arrival. This indicated that they had not reached the park's official routes. On September 3rd, around noon, a patrol helicopter surveying the area spotted a car that matched the description. It was parked at the beginning of an old hunting trail 27 miles from Talkeetna. The road there meandered through swamps and thickets, and it was almost impossible to get there without an off-road vehicle. When the officers arrived, they saw a gray SUV with a thin layer of dust on the hood. The doors were locked. Inside were neatly folded things: jackets, a first aid kit, Denise's camera, a road map with the route marked. In the trunk was an empty canister and a rope folded into a bay. There were no signs of a struggle or damage. On the ground next to the wheels, there were clear boot prints leading towards the forest and then lost in the grass. According to the protocol, the car was opened only after the mother's permission. The keys were found under a rug near the passenger seat. In the glove compartment were documents in the name of Caitlin Morrow, a small amount of cash, and a nurse's license. There were no phones. The battery was dead, but all the indicators showed that the car had been there for several days. That evening, Sergeant Calder informed Martha Morrow of the discovery. According to her, she realized something serious had happened. The next morning, the search and rescue operation was officially launched. Rangers from Denali were the first to leave, joined by volunteers from the local fishing club. They inspected the trail that started from the parking lot, but after the first 100 yards, the road split into several narrow passages among the trees. One of the searchers, Thomas Baker, recalled, "It's dark there even in the daytime. The forest is a wall, and any trace disappears the day after it rains." Boot prints found near the car matched Caitlin's shoe size. This confirmed that the sisters had indeed left the car voluntarily and set off on foot. However, no one could say where they were going. Local residents recalled that in the last days of August, there were short but heavy rains in that part of the forest. The water could have washed away any prints or traces. The first report stated, "It is likely that the girls continued to move towards the lake. Further actions are unknown." All subsequent calls to their phones were recorded by the system as unanswered. Not a single signal entered the network. This meant that the devices were either turned off or broken. The search team decided to set up a temporary base near the parking lot. They set up a tent, laid out maps, and prepared routes for patrolling. On the first day, they found nothing, only fragments of old bottles and the remains of a fire, which, according to experts, had been lit several months ago. The wind from the mountains carried the smell of dampness and tar. The dogs brought in the next morning picked up the trail near the car, but quickly lost it. They walked in circles, barked, and then quieted down, as if they didn't understand where the smell was leading. For Marty Morrow, these hours of waiting became endless. She called the search headquarters every hour, asking for any news, even the smallest. In response, she heard short reports. "Work is ongoing." This was the beginning of the first stage of the operation, which was supposed to provide answers, but instead opened a new abyss of questions. In the forest where they went, there were no witnesses, no cameras, and no roads. Only the silence that swallowed everything around them, and the road that led to the heart of wild Alaska. The search operation officially began on September 4, 2010. In the morning, more than 24 people arrived at the parking lot near the abandoned Jeep: rangers, volunteers, dog handlers, and state police officers. Nearby was a National Guard helicopter that was supposed to fly over the area around the forest. Everyone knew that in such conditions, the first hours were crucial, but the days were already lost. The trails were covered by rain, and the forest could hide anything during this time. The operation was led by Sergeant Harry Calder. In his report, he wrote that the search conditions were difficult: inaccessible terrain, marshy soil, frequent downpours, and limited visibility due to fog. The groups were divided into sectors, each with radio communication and coordinates from the last point where the car was parked. Their task was to trace the route that the Morrow sisters were believed to have taken and reach the hut mentioned in posts on tourist forums. The first 2 days of the search were fruitless. The rangers combed the bank of the stream, which, according to the map, led in the direction of the lake. The dogs lost the trail as soon as the path diverged in several directions. The air was filled with the smell of wet bark and smoke from the searchers' camp, which had been set up near the car. The daytime temperature barely rose above freezing, and at night the fog descended so thickly that visibility was reduced to a few yards. On September 6th, the helicopter flew over a 30-square-mile patch of forest. From the air, the pilots could only see an endless green-gray surface where the trees merged into a continuous sea. No sign of people, tents, or smoke. One of the pilots, Sergeant David Lowell, later recalled, "From above, everything looked the same. Pine trees, swamps, a few streams. Even if someone had lit a fire, we wouldn't have seen it through the fog." On the 8th day after the search began, when there was almost no hope, one of the groups received a landmark. Junior Ranger Anthony Wood reported coming across an old wooden bridge over a stream, the same one that had been marked on the map found in the sisters' car. Beyond the bridge was a narrowed trail almost completely covered by vegetation. The group decided to follow it. After a few hours, they reached a small clearing where a hut stood. It was a wooden building about 12 by 12 feet with a sloping roof and broken windows. The door was held open by a single hinge, and the smell of mold and smoke reigned inside. The Rangers turned on their flashlights, and dust swirled in the light. On the floor were fragments of old shelves, a rusty bucket, and an empty can of canned food. A fragment of a hunting hook hung on the wall, and a charred kettle was near the fireplace. There were no fresh signs of human presence. The report states, "Everything inside was covered with a layer of dust. There are no signs of recent use. The hut is empty." Someone had once carved the date 97 with a knife on one of the bars near the door. This was probably the last time the hut was visited. The Rangers examined the surrounding area, took pictures of the area, but did not find any of Caitlin or Denise's personal belongings. Not even the smallest thing. Not a single piece of cloth. Not a single print. At a distance of about 100 yards from the hut, they found the remains of an old fire pit, overgrown with moss. The coals were so old that even a laboratory test could not determine their age. When the news of the hut's discovery reached the headquarters, Martha Morrow was informed by phone. She had hoped that this place would be a clue, but the result only emphasized the emptiness. In her testimony, she said, "I thought they would at least find their things, but there was nothing there. It was as if they had never existed." The search continued around the lake, which, according to the map, the sisters were supposed to reach. The lake turned out to be small, with a narrow shore and dark water. Its surface was calm, like a mirror. The divers examined the coastal strip, but made no findings. Even the bottom had no traces of human activity, no debris, no ropes, no remnants of equipment. Over the next 2 weeks, rescuers combed the area within a 10-mile radius of the lake. Thermal imagers, dog teams, and drones were used, but the forest remained silent. The only things they found were old animal tracks, broken branches, and a few hunting traps, presumably left long ago. By mid-September, weather conditions deteriorated sharply. The first frosts began at night, the roads became sour, and helicopters could not take off due to thick fog. The head of the operation decided to temporarily suspend the search. The order sounded dry. Suspend work until weather conditions stabilize. In fact, this meant that the active phase was over. All materials were handed over to the Fairbanks District Police Department. The report stated that no evidence of foul play was found, and the main theory was that the boy had disappeared while hiking under unspecified circumstances. That fall week, most of the posters with Caitlin and Denise's photos were removed from Talkeetna, leaving only one on the window of the local gas station where their faces were last seen. The hut that was supposed to be the destination of their journey was silent. It stood on the shore of a dark lake, leaning in the wind, and looked as if it was waiting for guests who would not return for a long time. Its emptiness became another question to a story that had no answers. August of 2014 was particularly dry in Alaska. The forests had turned brown, the rivers were shallow, and the winds coming down from the mountains carried the smell of ash from distant fires. That morning, 3 men, moose hunters from the town of Fairbanks, set out on an expedition deep into the taiga, where even rangers don't usually go. They were looking for a place where, according to the locals, large males were found. The area was remote, about 40 miles from an old hunting trail once linked to the Morrow sisters' case. After several days of traveling, they found themselves in a valley where the trees were so dense that even during the day, it was twilight and damp. One of the hunters, Alan Krieg, later told police that they were walking along a dried-up creek bed when they smelled a burning odor. At first, they thought someone had made a fire nearby, but the smell was old and heavy, as if it came from the ground. A few hundred yards away, between the trees, they spotted a black spot, the burnt remains of a small building. As the men got closer, they saw what had once been a hut. All that was left was the frame, charred beams, a caved-in roof, and burnt logs. The walls were holding up in some places, but in others they had fallen down, forming a dark gap through which they could see inside. There were pieces of metal, a burnt bucket, and the remains of an old stove lying on the ground around. The fire seemed to have happened many years ago. At first, they thought it was just an abandoned hunting camp, of which there are hundreds in this area. But their attention was drawn to the shine inside. Something light was reflected in the ashes. Krieg picked up the lantern and stuck his hand through the wall's gap. When the beam fell to the floor, he saw 2 figures sitting huddled together. They seemed to be mannequins that had once stood by the fireplace. The plastic on their heads was shiny, and their bodies were black and distorted. It took them a few seconds to realize that they were not figures. They stepped back without saying a word. Alan recalled, "At first I thought they were scarecrows, but when I looked closer, I saw bones." The bags, which had once been transparent, had melted from the heat, forming what looked like a gray shell that still covered the skulls. One of the men vomited right at the doorstep. The other, an older man named Bob Felton, picked up the phone and tried to call rescuers, but there was no connection. They went to the hill where the signal appeared and made a short call to the wildlife dispatcher. In the recording of the call, which is part of the case file, Felton speaks calmly, but his voice is shaking. "There's a cabin on fire, 2 people inside. Looks like people. It's a very old place. We didn't touch anything." A few hours later, the message was passed on to the Alaska State Police. The coordinates were inaccurate, so the helicopter didn't leave until the next morning. The crew flew over the area, but the cabin was not immediately visible among the dense tree canopy. From the air, it was hidden by a wall of spruce and pine trees that grew closely together. The pilot could only see a narrow streak of smoke from a signal fire that the hunters had lit to mark the spot. When a team of investigators and forensic experts finally got there, they found the men sitting by their backpacks, silent and exhausted. Investigators captured the scene on video: a small ruined hut, black with ash in the middle of an overgrown meadow. Inside were 2 figures that had once been human. They were sitting next to each other, their backs pressed against each other. On their heads were the remains of transparent bags that had melted but still held their shape. Experts described what they saw dryly, without emotion. The bodies are in a sitting position, and there are fragments of charred things nearby. A metal button, part of a zipper, a fragment of a shoe. Probably female remains. Later, the police would confirm that it was this detail, the plastic bags, that caused their discovery to be immediately classified as a crime, not an accident. Investigators assumed that the bags had been put on before the fire. Against the background of black ash, they looked like eerie masks, frozen in their last movement. One of the experts who worked at the site later told reporters, "Even after many years of work, I have never seen anything like this. What the fire has done has not erased the main thing, the feeling that these people did not just die, but were punished." After fixing the scene, The body of each victim was carefully removed, along with the layer of earth on which it lay. Everything was packed in airtight containers to preserve any remaining tissue or substances. Yellow tape was placed around the hut. The hunters were interviewed on the spot and sent to the nearest police station for detailed statements. They described the hut in the same way. It was old, ruined, and it was obvious that it had been burning for a long time. Everything inside was frozen, as if time had stopped. Meanwhile, at Fairbanks Police Headquarters, where the discovery was reported, the detective on duty looked up the coordinates. The name of the area, the North Pass area, matched the route the Morrow sisters had tried to take 4 years earlier. When the next officer looked at the old maps, it became clear that this was not the cabin that was searched in 2010. This one was dozens of miles away from the previous area. A few hours later, the call was transferred to Detective Harry Calder, the same man who had led the initial investigation into the disappearance. He received a brief report. 2 bodies have been found in a burned-out cabin, probably female. The coordinates do not match the previous location. Calder stopped when he heard the last words. According to his colleagues, he was silent for a long time, then ordered DNA experts and forensic scientists from Anchorage to be dispatched immediately. This event came as a shock to the local authorities. According to the official procedure, the case, which was considered closed as a disappearance under unspecified circumstances, was reopened under a new qualification: a possible double murder. That night, a helicopter circled the forest again, shining its searchlights on the dark trees. Short commands were heard on the radio. Fixing coordinates, hold Sector 3, approach via the northern slope. The forest that had swallowed up the 2 sisters 4 years ago was now giving them back, coldly, without explanation, as if it were paying back a debt. When the helicopter with the forensic experts touched down, the place was already surrounded by tape. The humidity was such that the smoke from the local hunters' signal fire did not dissipate, but covered everything with a gray fog. Detective Harry Calder stepped on the ground slowly, as if he knew that this moment would bring him back to a past he did not want to remember. The hut looked like a black wreck from another time. Only burnt beams remained of the former walls, partially pressed into the ground. Inside there were ashes, burnt fragments of logs, and metal remains. The forensic experts worked in silence. They took pictures, measured, and labeled each fragment. The dust was in the air, and in the light of the spotlights, it looked like gray rain that did not fall. Dr. Miller, the forensic pathologist, crouched down next to the bodies. Their bones were tightly packed together, remarkably well preserved for such a fire. The plastic bags on their heads had not burned completely. They had melted, but retained their shape. When they were carefully removed, it became apparent that they had been put on before the fire. Under the charred polyethylene, there were traces of tight compression around the neck. The expert's conclusion was unequivocal: strangulation. The fire only concealed the crime. Nearby, in a layer of ash, they found fragments of personal belongings: a clasp from a tourist backpack, a metal spoon, and a melted camera lens. Everything was carefully photographed and numbered. One of the technicians used tweezers to pull a silver stud earring from the ashes. According to her mother's later testimony, Denise Morrow had worn one. Shards of glass and a metal bottle cap were found near the wall where the table once stood. It did not belong to the victims. Chemical analysis revealed that it was the remains of a cheap, locally produced whiskey. The label was not preserved, but the glass shards had a characteristic shape that was used only in a few small distilleries in the state. This was the first physical evidence that showed that someone else had been in the cabin besides the sisters. Shoe prints were found on the ground around the hut, and the shape of the soles suggested that they were men's. The soil was hard. The prints were partially erased by time, but one of them clearly recorded the size and pattern of the tread. It was made into a plaster cast. Calder would later write in his report, "It does not belong to any of the rescuers or hunters. The footprint is deep, from a heavy man. According to local government inventory books, the cabin once belonged to a hunter named Frank Delmar. He lived here permanently from the late 90s until 2008, after which he disappeared. His case had once been listed among the unsolved ones. Disappearance in the woods, no trace. Calder knew the name. It had come up in the archives during Morrow's first search, but it didn't matter then. It didn't matter now. When the experts had finished collecting the material, Calder walked closer to the bodies. He stared for a long time, saying nothing. A short entry would later appear in his diary. The fire was not the end, but the beginning. Someone tried to erase the trail. He failed. By the evening, the place looked like a dismantled scene. Containers with material evidence stood under the tents. Every square foot of the territory was photographed and described. The ashes were picked up layer by layer, looking for even the smallest fragments. In the evening, a report came out. A preliminary examination confirmed that the death was caused by asphyxiation and the fire was set afterwards. The police officially reclassified the case from a disappearance to a double murder investigation. Among his belongings, Calder separately placed a bottle shard and a cast of a man's footprint, two silent objects that indicated someone's presence in the hut. Someone who sat next to the sisters before the fire consumed them and the forest around them. When the Morrow case landed back on Detective Harry Calder's desk, he started by doing what he always did, rereading the old reports. Yellowed pages, dusty texts, handwritten notes made in the fall of 2010. Back then, among the dozens of inconclusive testimonies, there were many details that seemed trivial at the time. But after the hut was found, every little thing could have a different meaning. In a report dated September 4th, he came across a short paragraph labeled "Supporting Information." It was written by a hunter named Robert Gray, a resident of Talkeetna. He said that he had seen an old khaki SUV near the old forest road that led in the direction where the sisters had disappeared. The recording had a note, "Not related to the case." At the time, it really didn't seem important. There are hundreds of such vehicles in the taiga. But now, Calder dwelt on these words. The report had a timestamp, the evening of August 26, just as the sisters were supposed to be on their route. He contacted Gray, who still lived in Talkeetna. He recalled, "I saw him near the river bend. He was standing on the side of the road, his door open. It looked like someone was rummaging through the trunk." When asked if he saw the driver, Gray said he thought he saw a man, tall, wearing a dark jacket, but he couldn't see his face. This time, the detective did not dismiss the detail. He sent a query to the state's vehicle database, looking for registered khaki SUVs belonging to residents in the area at the time. The search report, dated August 20, 2014, stated, 5 matches were found. One of the owners is Leo Cren. The name was familiar to several locals. Calder learned that Cren lived in a neighboring valley, owned a hunting ground, and hardly ever talked to people. He was described as a recluse who lived alone for years, going into town only once a month to get provisions. He allegedly sold the SUV a year after the sisters' disappearance. The detective and his colleague, State Police Agent Mark Williams, went to the site the next morning. The road to the property led through low fog, where the tires were mired in mud. Cren's house stood on a rise in a dense spruce grove. It was an old wooden house with peeling paint, hunting traps, and empty canisters scattered around. A dog was lying on the porch, not even raising its head when they stopped. Leo Cren met them cautiously. He was in his 60s, thin, with a graying beard and scarred hands. The report stated, "Suspicious behavior, nervous movements, avoids eye contact." When asked about the events of 4 years ago, he replied that he was hunting alone by the river and did not see anyone. His words sounded calm, but not convincing. During the conversation, Calder noticed a large tarpaulin behind the house covering something bulky. The wind lifted the edge and a metal surface shone underneath. When the detective got closer, he could make out the familiar silhouette of an old SUV. The color was dull green, the body was scratched, but the body number was still legible. It was the same type of car that had been seen on the road on the day of the disappearance. Krentz quickly walked over and said, "It's an old vehicle, not running." But Calder just nodded. He had no right to inspect without a warrant, so he only took a picture of the cover from a distance. He would later write in his report, "The owner's behavior during the conversation changed after the question about the car. The answer was evasive." After returning to headquarters, he sent a request to the Vehicle Registration Department. A day later, the answer came back. The SUV had indeed belonged to Leo Cren since 2009, deregistered a year after the Morrow sisters disappeared. There was no record of a sale. The car was still officially his. Calder assembled a team to return to the site with a warrant. His intuition told him that was where the key was. In his memos, he wrote, "Krentz doesn't look like a killer, but he is hiding something. His silence is louder than his words." While preparing the documents, the detectives interviewed several neighbors. One of them, Farmer George Melton, said that old man used to go into the woods for several days a few years ago, always alone. He came back dirty, smelling like smoke. Then suddenly he stopped. He said he broke his old car. Another witness recalled hearing Krentz burning something at night on his property. Black smoke was rising above the trees. As Calder reread the testimony, he had a sense of repetition. It all resembled the stories he had heard after Morrow's disappearance. A lone hunter, an old car, forest, and smoke. But now all of these fragments were fitting together into a single picture. In the evening, he pulled up archival drone photos taken during the first search in 2010. In one of them, taken over the river bend where the car was seen, a small khaki SUV silhouette was indeed visible. When the image was enlarged, the body number was partially legible. It matched Krenz's license plate. Now Calder had a fact that was beyond question, and at the same time, a new question. Why had this man, who lived several dozen miles from the crime scene, never come to the attention of the investigation? Why was his name not mentioned in any of the reports of previous years? As the detectives left town the next morning, the sky was overcast. Calder was holding a search warrant. The road led to the very valley where Leo Cren's old house stood, and under the tarp was a car that could tell what happened in August 2010. The search of Leo Cren's car began early in the morning. The dark green SUV was parked in the backyard of his property under the same tarp that had been seen during the previous visit. Now there were floodlights, cameras, and evidence markers all around. The forensic experts followed the protocol. Every movement was recorded on camera. Every inch of the body was inspected as a possible source of traces. The car looked abandoned from the outside, but suspiciously clean inside. The seats were worn, but the surfaces were washed, and the dashboard was shiny. The trace evidence expert who conducted the initial inspection noted, "The car is old, but the interior has been cleaned to sterility. Dust has been removed even from the ventilation grills." It looked unnatural for a hunter who lived alone and used the car in the field. After taking photos and swabs on the trunk surface, the experts turned off the lights. In the darkness, an ultraviolet lamp came on. At first glance, the metal bottom of the luggage compartment was clean, but under the ultraviolet beam, dozens of spots and spatter-like stains appeared. Some were in the form of stretched droplets, as if something had fallen from a height. The expert noted, "The glow is characteristic of biological fluids, probably blood." The chemical used to treat the surface flashed a blue glow. The stains covered not only the bottom, but also the side panels of the trunk. Their number indicated that someone had tried to erase the trail, but repeatedly. The report states, "An attempt at mechanical cleaning is likely. However, residual hemoglobin particles were preserved." The samples were sent to a laboratory in Anchorage. The results came back a few days later. The blood belonged to a female, and the group matched that of Caitlin Morrow. Repeated DNA analysis confirmed the match with the material taken from the hairbrush provided by Martha Morrow. In the report, forensic experts wrote, "The probability of error is less than 1 in a million." Inside the cabin, experts worked even more carefully. Under the passenger seat, between the upholstery and the metal frame, the technician found a small object that glistened in the flashlight. It was a silver stud earring with a tiny stone. It was packed in a separate bag and photographed from different angles. When they showed the photo to her mother, she immediately recognized the jewelry. Denise had worn them since she was a teenager, not even taking them off on hikes. Calder stood by the car, watching as the forensic team labeled each piece of evidence. He hardly spoke, just made notes in his notebook. Later, he would write down, "The cleanliness of the interior is no accident." He was cleaning, knowing that he was not looking for garbage, but for the memory of someone. When the laboratory provided the full results, there was no doubt. Not only traces of blood were found in the car, but also several hairs of female origin. 2 of them genetically matched the DNA of both sisters. This was direct evidence that Caitlin and Denise had been inside Cren's SUV at least a short time before their deaths. In addition to biological materials, another interesting detail was found. On a rubber mat under the back seat, a tread mark was found with a pattern that matched the boots found near the burned-out cabin. The tread pattern matched the mold made at the crime scene at 3 points. This connected the car not only to the sisters, but also to the very place where they were found. When the results were handed over to the prosecutor's office, the case was officially categorized as a criminal investigation into murder. Leo Cren became the main suspect. His behavior during the search was now viewed from a different angle. Excessive restraint, avoiding eye contact, and repeated phrases about solitude and peace seemed to be part of his internal defense. The police invited experts in behavioral analysis. They pointed out that Cren was a typical isolated type of hunter, able to hide aggression under the mask of indifference. He had no criminal record, but his neighbors recalled strange habits. At night, he would go out into the woods with a lantern, dig in the ground, and then light a fire. One man said he saw Cren burning old clothes. After coordinating with the prosecutor's office, Calder filed a petition for an arrest warrant. The judge approved the document without hesitation. The totality of the evidence, blood, DNA, personal belongings, was too strong to leave the suspect at large. That evening, the detective sat in his office for a long time, looking at the photos of the car. The spots that glowed under ultraviolet light looked like a map drawn in blood. In one of the pictures, the lens caught the light reflected from an earring. Calder closed the folder and quietly told his colleague that they now had not just a trail, but proof, the clearest he had ever seen. At dawn, the police convoy drove toward the valley where Leo Cren's old house stood. Fog hung over the road, and the engines hummed steadily, without pause. For Calder, this trip meant a return not only to the suspect, but also to the answers he had been searching for 4 years. In his hands, he held a copy of the warrant and a picture of a silver earring, proof that the Morrow sisters had left their mark. And now that trail led to the man who was trying to erase it forever. At dawn on August 19th, the police convoy entered the valley. The air was heavy, saturated with moisture, and there was a thick fog over the swamps. The road to Leo Cren's house ran through the forest, where even the sound of the motor seemed muffled. The operation involved state police officers, investigators, and a negotiator from Anchorage. They had an arrest warrant and a search warrant. Cren's house stood on a slope, surrounded by old trees. The roof was sagging, the windows were boarded up with plywood, but there was faint smoke coming from the chimney, which meant he was inside. The police officers were positioned in a semicircle, blocking all directions. One of them, Officer Jackson, later recalled, "It was like he was waiting, like he already knew why we were here." Calder was the first to approach the porch. The door was locked. When he knocked and introduced himself, no sound came from inside. Only a few seconds later, he heard footsteps. According to witnesses, Cren spoke in a low voice through the wooden wall. "Go away. You are too late." His voice was calm, but he sounded tired. The negotiator established contact through a loudspeaker. For the first hour, Cren did not answer questions. He walked around inside, furniture moving, the click of a gunbolt. The police did not dare to storm the house. It could have been mined, and the suspect had weapons and hunting experience. According to the negotiator, the first contact took place about 2 hours later. Cren said briefly, "I know why you are here." When it was explained to him that he was suspected of involvement in the deaths of the Morrow sisters, he replied, "It was their own fault. They minded their own business." The negotiator later repeated this phrase verbatim in his report, and it became central to the subsequent investigation. Calder, who was standing by the door, heard snippets of the conversation. He realized that Cren did not deny that he had met the girls, but he did not explain his motives or the circumstances. The report reads, "The tone is even indifferent. Behavior is non-aggressive, but unpredictable. Gives the impression of a person who has lost touch with reality or has accepted his own sentence." During the negotiations, the detective tried to establish contact. He spoke calmly, without orders, repeating that everything could still be explained. In response, Cren remained silent. After a while, light appeared through a gap in the window plywood. He lit a lamp inside. Then he said, barely audibly, "I didn't want to do it, but they saw. You do not understand what silence in the forest is." This phrase was recorded on the intercom recording. The police interpreted it as an indirect confession. Psychologists on the scene noted that Cren's behavior resembled the loner syndrome, a condition where a person is unable to separate his or her own guilt from imaginary justice. He demanded nothing, no escape, no guarantees. He seemed to be just waiting to be taken away. Around noon, the tension reached its limit. The officers heard a bolt being pushed back inside. Then there was silence. A few minutes later, the door opened. Cren stood on the threshold unarmed, his hands down. His face was gaunt, with gray hair and dirt on his cheek. He was wearing hunting camouflage, similar to the one described by witnesses 4 years ago. He said nothing when the officers approached and handcuffed him. According to the search report, they found only old things in the house: hunting traps, coiled ropes, several empty bottles, a camera with a broken lens, and a pile of paper with fragments of notes. One sheet read, "They came when everything was already destroyed. I only closed what others had opened." This fragment was later added to the case file, but it did not provide any specific answers. As Cren was being led to the car, he looked back at the forest. Calder's report reads, "He smiled, not madly, but like a man who sees something that others do not." He was put in an armored van and driven to the precinct in Fairbanks. He did not say a single word during the trip. Locals watching from afar told reporters that the forest was frozen that day. Even the birds were silent. One of the eyewitnesses, a farmer from a neighboring village, said, "It felt like he was part of the place. If they hadn't taken him away, he would have stayed there forever." After the arrest, Calder watched the video of the negotiations. Cren's words sounded calm, without remorse. "They weren't supposed to see. I wasn't going to do it. But when someone opens an old door, there is always someone behind it." For the investigation, this phrase became the last mystery. It did not explain what exactly the sisters had seen, but it hinted at an event that Cren considered dangerous for himself. The motive remained unknown, but the fact of participation was undeniable. When the police motorcade left the valley in the evening, the fog was already thickening over the mountains. The sun was barely breaking through the haze, illuminating the abandoned site. On the ground near the porch, there were police boot prints mixed with old hunter tracks. The report labeled this place as the point of arrest. But for Calder, it was different. the very line where the forest stopped being silent, and the truth, though not fully spoken, finally came to light.